Thank you. Thank you. Good evening. Before I start talking, I have to make one clarification, and that's, I understand that Christina was listed for tonight. That was a mistake. The topic, Beyond the Brain, is a title of my book, and this is something that I do alone. We do other things together, and she will be with us, with those of you who are participating in the experiential workshop during the weekend. But she stayed in Palo Alto. We had no idea that she was expected here, so I would like to apologize for that misunderstanding. I'd like to start by explaining that title, Beyond the Brain, that might sound a little strange, but basically the title reflects my belief after more than 3 decades now of exploration of non-ordinary states of consciousness, that if you do the kind of research which we have done, exploring psychedelic therapy, exploring non-drug experiential approaches, or studying people who are involved in some kind of systematic spiritual practice, people who are involved in trance states, trance dancing, for example, that you will be able to witness, observe, or if you do it yourself, experience phenomena which cannot be explained in the context of traditional thinking in academic psychiatry, what we refer to as the Newtonian Cartesian thinking, or we can talk about it as the mechanistic scientific model. So I believe very strongly that there are numerous observations which suggest that our understanding of consciousness, our understanding of how the human brain functions, our understanding of memory, all those things are superficial, and that they are inadequate when we somehow draw on the testimony of non-ordinary states of consciousness. They might be adequate models as long as we study people in the sort of pedestrian, everyday consciousness, but once we start studying non-ordinary states of consciousness, we need some kind of radical revision of our thinking. What I would like to do is to somehow take you at first through a little history, say something about how it happened that I myself started thinking along these lines. As you know, I've been involved very much in transpersonal psychology, which is a major effort to introduce spirituality into psychology. So I'd like to, and also it will take us way beyond the traditional Freudian framework. So I'd like to at first say a few anecdotes that will sort of establish my credentials as a former atheist and a former psychoanalyst. And then I will just share with you. So he decided to synthesize another sample, and then as he was synthesizing it, he started feeling very strange. He started hallucinating. He had powerful emotions, and this lasted for a few hours. And then he came back, first worried that he was going crazy, that this was the first psychotic episode, and then feeling that there must be some better explanation, and he came up with the idea that maybe this was somehow accidental intoxication by the substance he was working with. Now, you would have to know him. He is an absolutely meticulous, proper Swiss professor, and so he couldn't understand how possibly he could have intoxicated himself, gotten a sufficient quantity of it to experience this. But he tried it anyway. He later took what he considered to be infinitesimal quantity of LSD. He said, being very cautious, I decided to take only 250 micrograms. The ergot alkaloids, they work in milligrams, so he took 1/4 of what would be a clinical dose of the other ergot alkaloids, because he didn't know that he had to do with the most powerful psychoactive substance ever discovered by humans. He actually scheduled his whole day in the laboratory. He just took this on the side. He put his sort of notebook, and he thought once in a while he closes his eyes and sees if anything's happening. And of course, within half an hour, started experiencing the same kind of things that he had the first time, only much more powerful, he got downstairs, got on a bicycle, wanted to make it home, and had an episode with a policeman, and then finally got home. They called the doctor, and then because he himself thought he was dying, and then finally when the doctor came, there was a turning point, and he actually started experiencing himself being reborn, experiencing a very ecstatic, mystical kind of state. And so this is how LSD was discovered. And the son of his boss actually was a psychiatrist, so they reported it to his son, whose name was Walter Stoll. He did the first pilot study with LSD, published it, and this became overnight a scientific sensation. So now Sandoz was sending it, to different laboratories, to different institutes, and felt that this should be thoroughly researched. So there were two indications in this insert which was accompanying this sample. One was that it could be used as a model psychosis, that you could give it to normal people and that they would have for 6 or 8 hours a state which many people felt was similar to what we see in sort of naturally occurring in psychiatric patients. And then you could do pre and post and during, you could do various tests, you could take samples of blood, you could take samples of urine, you could wire people up and see what the physiological changes are and so on. And you would get some sense as to what changes in the organism are correlated with these mental changes, and you could get some insight as to what naturally occurring psychoses are. And then the other suggestion was that this is a very interesting learning tool. This could be used for didactic purposes. Here is an opportunity for psychiatrists, for psychologists, for social workers, for students of psychology or psychiatry to have this safe, reversible experience of a state that was very similar to the state that the psychiatric patients experience. And as a result of it, you would understand that state better, you could relate to psychiatric patients or psychotic patients better, and you could treat them more effectively. So this was an opportunity I couldn't have missed. I got very excited about it. I became one of the first volunteers, and it was in this experiment at the psychiatric department of the School of Medicine where I had such powerful confrontation with my own psyche that it instantly overshadowed everything that I read about psychoanalysis or experienced along those lines. And then I had the idea that maybe this is what psychoanalysis is missing. If we can combine psychoanalysis with this tool that can bring you in touch with your unconscious very fast, that we can intensify or accelerate or deepen the psychoanalytic process. And so from this then came a technique which we now call psycholytic at first. The term psycholytic is related to the root lysis, which means dissolving. You have to distinguish it from psychoanalysis. This is psycholytic, means dissolving the tensions or resolving the conflicts in the psyche. What it was basically was establishing a contact with a patient, then exploring the history somewhat, getting a sense for what the problems are, developing a good relationship, and then explaining what these states were about, how we are going to use it, and then start regular repeated sessions, maybe in 10 days, 2 weeks intervals, where the therapist would be present all the time, the person would be experiencing. Then after the session, the client would write a report about it, what happened from the subjective point of view, and the therapist would describe it from the objective, from the behavioral point of view. And then we would just simply continue and see what happens to symptoms. You see what kind of material would emerge in connection with symptoms. How would symptoms change after certain sessions? After what kinds of sessions would people feel better? On which level, in connection with what kind of experiences, symptoms would be resolved or alleviated and so on. Or if things would be worse here, what kind of sessions would lead to that kind of intensification of symptoms? And so we worked with over 50 patients in Prague, and we kept very detailed records, so that then when this treatment was over, we could review this whole series of experiments and get some insights as to what LSD does, and also see what kind of psychic dynamic or psychological dynamics would be revealed in these sessions, and get some insights into also into the, let's say, architecture of psychopathology. Now, this one important thing emerged from this research, which became clear very, very soon, and that was that the best way you can understand what something like LSD is, and it applies also to some other psychedelics, you can best understand it by thinking about it as a catalyst or as an amplifier, as a substance that energizes the psyche and changes the relationship between the unconscious and consciousness. And then later we discovered also changes the relationship between superconscious and consciousness. So that things that are not normally conscious would start surfacing and become the content of that person's experience. Many people, many professionals who did not do systematic work with LSD, they try to discard it as being a toxic psychosis. You see, you take a substance and sort of scrambles your brain processes, and somehow some kind of nonsense comes out of it, bizarre, sort of absurd, incomprehensible things. And the content of that experience does not have anything to do with how the psyche functions under normal circumstances. It is an artifact. It's somehow, all the contents would be really a product of an interaction between the drug and the brain that don't have any relevance for understanding who we are. And this approach became totally untenable. And it became clear that this is an amplifier, this is a catalyst. So when we take it, we do not have an LSD experience, we have an experience of ourselves. Whether we understand it or not, whether we like it or not, it is an extrapolation, it is an expression, a manifestation of human nature. Now, if people would have bummers, if tremendous aggression would be coming up, if some enormous states of anxiety would be coming up, or some kind of instinctual distortions and so on, it would be the part of the human psyche that has not been acknowledged in academia. This is why it is incomprehensible. But once you become familiar with it, once you understand that it's there, you will also get a different understanding why we live in the kind of world that we live in. You see, that those are the levels out of which some of the extreme manifestations of humanity can come. If you want to understand psychology of wars, if you want to understand psychology of revolutions, if you want to understand how it is possible that concentration camps happen. And on the other side, you will understand something like what was happening to Sri Ramana Maharshi, or you will understand Maharishi, you will understand prophets, avatars, and so on. So you get a sense that what we deal with in traditional psychology is a sort of truncated, is a narrow image that simply does not recognize, does not acknowledge the extreme sides of the spectrum, which are on the negative side and the positive side, in the unconscious and the superconscious. So when this became clear that LSD was a catalyst, then it became also very clear that there is a tremendous heuristic potential in it. By heuristic, I mean that you can discover new things about the human psyche, using this as a tool. In other words, you can study aspects of the human psyche, aspects of yourself that are there, but that you cannot study under ordinary circumstances. So again, this is, in my understanding, this is not exaggeration to claim that if psychedelics could be used properly, judiciously, sort of, with, under proper supervision and with certain expertise, that the potential function would be on the level of, for psychiatry or psychology, what a microscope means for biology or medicine, or what a telescope means for astronomy. Now, by this I'm not condoning, you see, what happened with it, how we used it. There's hardly any other culture that screwed up so much on psychedelics as we did. In every other culture, those are sacred tools. They would be used with reverence in proper rituals after preparation. People don't take it in parties where somebody, throws something into a punch without other people knowing, and so on. So obviously this is a powerful tool. So it has tremendous potential. It has also tremendous risks if you are not using it properly. But it is my belief that we have really unfortunately lost the most interesting tool for the exploration of human nature when we lost somehow psychedelics for psychiatry. Now, what were the kinds of things that were coming up? And again, I would say they were coming through psychedelic research, but I believe that they have sort of general implications, that you can generalize them to human psyche as such. And in the last 10 years, we have developed a technique which we call holotropic breathing, which we'll be doing in the weekend, where you use non-drug means. You just use controlled breathing, you use sound, music, you use certain kind of body work, and essentially you see the same spectrum of experiences in a randomly selected sample of people. So if you get this similar kind of phenomena with something as physiological as breathing, it's very difficult to explain it away as an artifact. You can't be much more physiological than using breath. So as long as we were using psychedelics, you see, there was always, even if we felt that this was clearly a catalyst, this was an amplifier, there was always in the background this doubt, who knows, maybe this is a very powerful, psychoactive, exotic substance, maybe somehow it participates in the creation of these contents. Now, if you get it with something as simple as breathing, it is obvious that there is there's some element, there's some aspect of human psyche that we really have not taken into consideration in this culture. Of course, there are many cultures that are aware of this. Certainly, people like the Tibetans are much more sophisticated in psychology than we are. In spite of all our technology, in spite of all the computers that we have in the laboratories, we are just really missing some of the very significant dimensions of the human psyche. So what are the kinds of things, what are the kinds of observations that we have to take into consideration here? The traditional psychiatry